a recent paper came out, and they found that about the sargassum, the floating sargassum we have in the world, so mostly in the Atlantic and the Sargasso Sea, that's 10 gigatons of carbon standing stock. And unlike trees, where, you know, like you would have to bury the entire tree and then the tree won't grow anymore. With sargassum, because it grows so fast, you can take quite a lot of that sargassum and bury it, for example, in the deep sea, or make products that last 100 years. And then you have captured that CO2. So sargassum is really like, I call it, it's the climate activist of the algae.
Hi, I'm Paola with Ola'pi Creative. Welcome to Conversations with Paola, a weekly video series exploring what it takes to make change. We share unfiltered, intimate, and inspiring conversations with wave makers in blue spaces around the world.
This is it. This moment is the bit that we can influence. It's dreams and goals are really important, but the bit that where we make a change is actually in the moment now. So that really matters to me, being aware of the ripple effect of our actions.
That's the epitome of what the ocean is to me. It's just like my heart and soul, and it's love and it's connection.
It was something that was going to stick with him for quite a while.
I mean, read lots of books. Books will motivate you. Experience things. Experiences will motivate you. Watch interviews like this.
And I have to say, being able to go out and make an impact.
How many people do you interact with every day? You can be a change maker for all of those people.
Now it's time for us to say, okay, everybody's had their chance. Now it's time to say, we're ready. We're going to kick it off, and we're going to start making our beach the most environmentally friendly.
And we love water! We love you!
Hi there, everybody. It is so good to see you today. I am Paola Espitia, and you are joining me here on Conversations with Paola. This is episode 35, so welcome. Today we have a really juicy experience because we are going to be speaking all about a little known topic that maybe some of you will start to pay closer attention to as the summer comes up and we start seeing the sargassum on our beaches. Dun, dun, dun. That's right. Today on Conversations with Paola, I am joined by Fran Elmer. She is going to be talking to us more about seaweed. She's a seaweed scientist who I actually got a chance to meet at the Oceanographic Center as part of Nova Southeastern University a few years ago. And she is one bright gal. She's a really wonderful resource, not only for seaweed, which you think might be a kind of an obscure topic, but she is really well versed as well in climate action and climate solutions. She goes by the Climate Pirates, which I'll have her explain for us here. And we'll also be talking about how we are using new media as a tool for science communication. She is the host of the Sargassum podcast, which is really exciting to know that this is even a topic that's coming out there and that there's a whole podcast that's dedicated to the topic of seaweed. So without any further delay, let's invite Fran in. Hello there, Fran. How are you?
I'm good. Hello, Paola.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a while. I'm so glad we got a chance to reconnect more recently. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So as I was alluding to, Fran and I actually go way back. She's Dr. Elmer now. And and more recently, we got a chance to reconnect because I saw that she had this really exciting project going on that is with the Sargassum podcast. And so once I saw that she was diving into new media, I invited her to be a part of a media mastermind that I run through our media agency, Ola'pi Creative. And so we've had a lot of fun getting a chance to know each other more importantly, too, getting a chance to hear about this amazing progress that she's been making in the world as a true wave maker. I'll let her explain more of that here in just a minute. But first, Fran, I'm wondering, what is your connection to water? What has been some of your favorite memories with water?
So I have a very strong connection to water, of course, as a marine biologist. I grew up in Switzerland, so I grew up close to a lake. So my first connections to water were not ocean-based, but lake-based. But then once I got to go on vacations to the ocean and go snorkeling and diving, I was hooked on the amazingness that's below water and just going to see all those animals and creatures down there. I think my most memorable experience was actually an experience I experienced from the beach. I was in South Caicos, which is part of the Turks and Caicos Islands, just below the Bahamas, where I was teaching marine biology. And with my students, every week we would go and clear a certain small area of the beach from sargassum to weigh it and figure out how much sargassum arrived that week. So not super exciting, but important research. So we were out there doing that, and one of my students screamed, "Shark." So we all look out in the ocean, of course, and yes, we saw this like big shark fin out there. And then we actually witnessed this shark, which later on when it came closer, we could actually see it was a hammerhead shark, about 2 meters long, maybe 2.5, 3 meters, who was hunting eagle rays. And it actually got an eagle ray, and we saw it like, you know, the shark and the eagle ray both out of the water, like fighting with each other. And then later on, the eagle rays and the shark got really close to shore, and we could see the fight close to shore. And one of the eagle rays, which actually got bitten by the shark, it had several big bites out of it. It laid really close to shore in the water. So once the shark was gone and the other 2 eagle rays escaped as well, we went into the water to retrieve that eagle ray. And yeah, it was like being live in a BBC documentary, seeing that from the beach and seeing, you know, such an encounter that's very rare. Yeah, right in front of our eyes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's something I always tell folks too, is that I feel as though underwater, no matter where you look, there's always action. There's always something going on. I have yet to see a hammerhead eagle ray interaction like that. That's pretty amazing. But, you know, even as something as small as seeing the little Christmas tree worms disappear into a coral is exciting.
Yes. I mean, Christmas tree worms and corals are super fun too.
Now, you have actually dove very deeply into a topic that most people don't associate with marine biology, because they normally associate us with, as you know, dolphin trainers and whale huggers. But tell us a little bit more about your current work and how you actually got involved or interested in seaweed.
So I got interested in seaweed and sargassum especially. So sargassum is a species of seaweed. There's about 350, a genus of seaweed with about 350 species. But the ones we have on our beaches in the Caribbean and West Africa arriving en masse are just three morphotypes. So 2 species, and 1 species has 2 morphotypes. And that algae is always free floating in the ocean, so it's never attached to the bottom, which is quite special. And I got involved with it because when I started working in South Caicos as a faculty, it was 2018, it was August, and we had a lot of this seaweed. And when you fly from Florida to the Turks and Caicos Islands, you can see it from the plane. Like you can see all those rows of seaweed in the ocean. So I was like, yeah, as you said, I was just thinking, wow. And often we had those carpets of seaweed like laying in the bays, like waiting to go and beach. And we had sometimes knee-high, I think at some points even hip-high amounts of sargassum on the beaches. So really, really a lot of sargassum arriving. So at that point, I thought I had to come up with 2 research projects for my students to do as part of their study abroad semester with us. And I wanted to make one about the seaweed and determine how it affects seagrass beds. At that point, there was already one study out from Mexico that showed that there the seagrass beds were really negatively affected, and actually they all died off due to the sargassum on the beach, and then it backlashes into into the water, and you get this brown water and this like brown muck at the bottom. And so we did a study, and we saw the same stuff happening in South Caicos. We saw just stumps of seaweed, of seagrass, where we had a lot of sargassum on the beach. So that made me then really interested in continuing this study and seeing what's happening to the seagrass beds afterwards. How does this continue? Because I knew this was important for the island to figure out, and an important study to do. At the same time, for me, at that point, sargassum was a nuisance. But then researchers from Greenwich University came to our island, and they're like, we want to study if sargassum can be used as biofuel. And at that point, I was already very interested in solving climate change and finding solutions. I'm like, wow, we're on an island where we using fossil fuels to make electricity. So if we could make biofuel out of sargassum, then we wouldn't have to use fossil fuels anymore. So for me, that was the first time I realized this can be used as a product and as a solution and as something positive. And then I went to a conference and I saw all these other products you can make out of it: fertilizer, paper, cardboard, plates, shoes, houses. And I'm like, wow, people are getting really creative on how to use this sargassum. You can make soaps out of it. And people were also talking about sinking it for carbon capture, which would be even better than making biofuel. Like, you're actually capturing some of that extra carbon or extra CO2 that's in the air. And my mind was blown. Like, I then started seeing sargassum as this huge solution, or this problem that can be turned into a solution. And with my students, we asked the local people on South Caicos, an island with 2,000 people, if they would want to use sargassum as a resource and for products. And I saw that when we talked to them, that was also for them the first time, like when we showed them the the single-use plates and stuff, that they thought about sargassum as a resource. So as me, they needed somebody to come from the outside to say, hey, this can be a product, for them to realize, oh, this could be a product. And that's really where one of the reasons why we started this podcast is because the local community wants more information on sargassum. They want to know what's coming to their shores. But they also need examples of people making products out of it, because that will empower them and inspire them to also make products. The international community is aware of sargassum, and they are inventing and they are entrepreneuring and they are making connections. So they will move into this space. But as a person who loves the Caribbean, has spent a lot of time there, I want the local community to also have a chance to take up that space and to be part of this new blue economy. And we can only do that if they have information available. And that's why we're making a podcast where we interview people who are making solutions or have knowledge in an informal way, so you can really get to know the person and get to know a bit the behind the scenes of their project and figure out how they made it happen. And we also give outreach talks. So not everybody wants to listen to 45-minute long podcast episodes that dive super deep, but a lot of people are interested in getting like a 20-minute talk, just the basics of sargassum, similar to what I just told you, so that they are kind of informed and can start from there. And then maybe they want to listen to some of the episodes and dive deeper if they want to start making their own products.
That's so fantastic. And I love how when we change the way we look at things, the things that we look at change. You know, our perspective truly is everything. It comes from our experience, our lived experience. And so it's so, you know, we can't blame people for seeing sargassum as a nuisance. I mean, I know a lot of Floridians have seen sargassum as a nuisance for a long time. And we always hear people reporting that every year it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and there's more sargassum piling up on our beaches. to get folks on the same page, I'm curious, can you give us just a brief background as far as where does sargassum come from? And an interesting point that we were talking about during our media masterminds last night, or on Monday, was the fact that perhaps there's dust involved in the sargassum overgrowth that we're seeing. So fill us in, where is all of this seaweed coming from?
Yes, so as you said, it's not the sargassum's fault. The sargassum is just an algae. It's the influx, the big amount of sargassum we have, which is the nuisance. And it's a real nuisance. There's a lot of problems, from people's health to losing revenue from tourism, to losing ecosystems nearby, to having your computer and your AC and your fridge eroding or corroding due to the sargassum fumes. So there's a lot of problems that are impacting people. So it is a nuisance. So where it comes from, so sargassum is this amazing algae that used to live and still is in the Sargasso Sea. So the Sargasso Sea is the only sea in the world that doesn't have a coast, so that doesn't have land around it. It is a gyre, so all the currents go to the inside of it, and that normally keeps the sargassum pretty stuck in there. We always had some sargassum coming out and getting a bit into the Caribbean and to the Gulf of Mexico and Florida, but never in the amounts we had so far. Then in 2010, we had the ocean's currents being quite different and some different winds. And, you know, these things are partly due to climate change, because our ocean currents in the Atlantic, like those big conveyor belts that are moving the ocean and driving our weather, they are changing, which is really, really scary, actually. And part of this change made it happen that some of the sargassum escaped and came over to Africa. And then there was pushed to the tropical Atlantic. And being in the tropical Atlantic, you have upwelling, which brings nutrients. You have a lot of light. You have warm water. And the sargassum is like, wow, I love this place. I'm going to become really big. So the sargassum can grow really fast. It can double in, like, I think about a week, 2 weeks, it can double in size. So imagine those matches doubling and doubling. And then the currents bring it from that patch in the middle of the Atlantic, in the tropical Atlantic, to both sides. So it brings it to West Africa, but it also brings it towards the Caribbean. And on that journey, it goes past some of those river outflows, the Congo, and also the Amazon. And those again bring up a little bit of nutrients and probably make it even grow more. For a long time we thought they were making it grow, but then we realized it's actually the upwelling in the middle of the ocean that makes most of the growth. But those nutrients are only like nitrogen and phosphorus that stay in the water. And another thing a lot of plankton and algae need to grow is iron. And iron doesn't stay in the water. It's too heavy. It will fall down to the seabed. So the iron to grow comes from the Sahara dust, for example. So when the Sahara dust comes over and the Caribbean and Florida gets a lot of Sahara dust, then that is that extra ingredient to make it grow. And of course, we still need to do more research to know how much does each of these components really contribute. But this is how far we have gotten so far with the science and why we have this much sargassum on our beaches. And yeah, we call it the sargassum influx because yeah, we just seeing more and more. And that whole belt is called the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt.
Must be very wild for people to even imagine that dust from the Sahara, from the continent of Africa, is coming over the oceans. You know, it's one thing you can understand that it would fly across the ocean like that, but the fact that it's having an impact on our local ecosystem here in the Caribbean side and in Florida is really mind-blowing. And it's a really good reminder too that we are all connected. The planet is really connected. I think
yes.
you know, one of the things that you're really interested in is climate action. And so I'm also really curious if you could go talk a little bit more too about how sargassum is playing this really big role as, you know, perhaps an ally against the fight against climate change. And so talk a little bit about carbon sinks, blue carbon sinks, and then I want to dive into your year of climate sabbatical.
Yes, so my colleague says sargassum may be the only thing that has been caused, negative thing that has been caused by climate change that can also be a major climate solution. And a recent paper came out and they found that about the sargassum, the floating sargassum we have in the world, so mostly in the Atlantic and the Sargasso Sea, that's 10 gigatons of carbon standing stock. And unlike trees where, you know, like you would have to bury the entire tree and then the tree won't grow anymore, and you really only have a few % of the carbon stock that can go into the soil and become carbon capture. With sargassum, because it grows so fast, you can take quite a lot of that sargassum and bury it, for example, in the deep sea, or make products that last 100 years, and then you have captured that CO2. So sargassum is really like, I call it, it's the climate activist of the algae. It was in the Sargasso Sea and it got really upset that we are trying to solve climate change without thinking about algae. And it decided to come out and be like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, disrupt that life of those humans. And it did, because they came in really big masses, a big group of sargassum, so to say, and it hit us where it hurts the most, our beaches, where we want to have fun, and then we have this constant reminder that, well, there's something wrong with this world, there's things that are out of balance, and that's what sargassum is. But at the same time, like a climate activist, being out there in the open ocean and growing in mass, it was sequestering all that CO2 from the air and from the ocean. And it brings it to us in the easiest way, like right to our shores. We don't have to go out all the way in the middle of the ocean to capture that carbon. And now the only thing we have to do is, instead of taking the sargassum and putting it on a pile somewhere, kind of like a landfill, and then it potentially polluting our soils and polluting our groundwater, and not making any profit from it, just paying for the removal so we can still have our beaches. That sargassum that we're collecting anyways, if we could turn this into a carbon capture, either by making products that last 100 years, which in today's way of living is something that doesn't really exist anymore, even for houses. They often don't last 100 years, unfortunately. Or by finding ways of sinking it to the deep sea. Of course, pilot studies have to be made to figure out if this is safe to do, because we don't want to just dump everything on the deep sea and then hurt the deep sea and those ecosystems down there. But doing that, we could really get a lot of carbon sequestrated, and that makes me super excited. So together with a colleague, we are working on proposals to get grants to answer all those questions we still have, like what will it do in the deep sea? How fast does sargassum grow? What do you need to add for it to grow more? How can you make something that you could sink down? Like, would you make a bale? Would you compress it? What do you need to do so it sinks down and it is inert there and it doesn't start making a toxic environment underwater? So this is really exciting, and it actually keeps me optimistic that even though we are very close to like climate catastrophe, that like a hot house Earth that we cannot even get back from, that these things like the seagrass, the seaweeds could really turn this around and take a lot of carbon out of the air that we already put there.
And God knows we need all kinds of unique, creative solutions. And again, what a wonderful thing to be able to turn something completely 180 degrees around, from it being a nuisance to it being this solution. You know, you are one of the few scientists. One of the reasons why I adore you is because you are one of these few scientists who is actually using their voice, taking this knowledge that you've spent decades collecting and standing up and actually saying something out there in the world. And you've done you've participated in a lot of really interesting climate activism. And one of the things that you've been doing is, I think this has been the year that you've turned your climate sabbatical.
Yes, so I started my climate sabbatical beginning of 2020, so right before the pandemic. And the reason behind it was I realized in 2019, you know, you read the IPCC report from 2018 and you realize, okay, we have about 12 years to turn this around where we still have time to act. And each single year is important, and what we do in the early years is actually more important than the last years. Like, we have to change now. We have to do massive changes now. And I realized that my role as a marine biologist isn't just to cut down my ecological footprint and wait for the governments to do the big roles, because it seems like the governments aren't working on their job that well. Unfortunately. And it also, Greta was really good at changing the narrative. Before it was always like, why would I have to make a change if nobody else does? But she said, okay, what will you tell people in the future that you did in this really important time? And this is probably the most important time we have ever had in human history. Like, in the next 10 years or 9 years, we are deciding about what life will be for us when we are retired and older, but also what life will be for all the future generations to come. Will it be a livable planet with lots of animals on it? Or will it be a place that is very hostile for life, where we have mass extinction of animals, we have our civilization collapse, and we literally go back to having to figure out how to survive. And I don't want that for us. So the thing to do is to actually take a lot of climate action, to speak up. And my students they were 20 years old. They want to become coral reef scientists. Well, coral reefs are the first thing to go when you think about climate change. So where was I really helping them? By teaching them how to survey corals underwater and spending really most of my time each day on that? Or would I help them more if I spent most of the time of my day really like talking up about climate change and finding solutions and making sure that climate action is taken? So that's why I decided I quit my job and I'm like, I'm going to go on a climate sabbatical. I'm going to do the stuff that's needed to be done, even if I don't get paid. And that way, when people ask me, or if I ask myself in the future, did I do enough? Did I do what was needed? I can say, I did everything I could. And that's super important to me. And now I'm part of Scientist Rebellion. As you said, I'm one of the few scientists who speaks up about this, which is a shame, because I think most of us scientists, especially the environmental and biological scientists, we know exactly what's happening with climate change. We know how bad it's going to be. We are reading these papers that just make your stomach turn, and you're just like starting to cry about the future and worried about your children if you have any. And Einstein said, the people who know have the duty to act. So that's what we do. We actually take action. We speak up. We do direct action. Some of us are getting arrested for what we're doing, but we just want people to realize, you know, how big of a problem climate change is, because most people don't realize, and also realize how big of a task it is to change that, because even less people realize how big of a change we have to do. We still think it can be a hobby or something. No, this is a big mission we all have to go on.
Right. And even I'm taking a note there of something that you said. I mean, even the fact that, I actually do have a son these days, right? He's 18 months old, and it gets really real when you do have somebody else to care for. And that's something I always tell folks too, is that, they may be a little blasé about climate change, or I'll be long gone by the time anything really shows up. And it's, I always warn them that, we don't plant an oak tree, for instance, today to be able to enjoy its shade tomorrow. We plant oak trees, the seeds, to be able to have this tree for generations to come. And that's the same thing that we have here with the planet and with what's going on with climate change. And so I think one of the scary things too is that as we see more science come out, we actually do see that there's effects that we are feeling now sooner, faster than we previously thought. And so the urgency is real. And we don't want to be living in a world where it's drier, the storms are wetter, there's more flooding as a result, there's food scarcity because of the wild weather, it's hotter. I mean, we already complained about how hot it is in the summer times, where we live now. And so do people really want to live on that kind of planet? The planet will continue to survive and do its thing without us. But it really truly does come back to humans, to us. What kind of future do we want to live in? And again, the fact that it's truly happening faster than we're even recognizing. And we're seeing it through these symptoms like this increase in sargassum. One of the, I want to be able to put more information about the scientist rebellion in the notes section. So we'll make sure that we add information there for folks who want to learn more about that, and also how they can become involved, because you are planning on doing some really big activities this summer with the rebellion, yeah?
Yes, we just had a wave of rebellion in March, our first one, where we had over 15 different countries, like scientists in over 15 different countries going on hunger strike and putting up papers, like posters of papers at their universities to make sure that other scientists are speaking up. And the next one is going to be in June, and then we have another one in September coming up. So those will be global actions where scientists from all over the globe are taking action and speaking up, which is a beautiful and wonderful thing and so much needed. As you said, like, things are going a lot faster than we thought. Like the permafrost melting and the high temperatures in Siberia that we had last summer in 2020, that was predicted for 2100. So we always think when you hear about climate change, we hear, oh, this is going to happen in 2100. And we think like, who cares? But now we see those effects that we said, oh, who cares, actually happening right here, right now to us, right here. Yeah, now. So that's scary.
Well, people will definitely get a chance to learn more about how the climate is impacting seaweed in particular through your Sargassum podcast. Where is it that folks can learn more about that and start tuning in?
So we, of course, made sure that the podcast is as easy to find as possible. It's called the Sargassum Podcast. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it anywhere that has podcasts. So we have a just audio podcast for the people who just want to listen. But we also have a YouTube podcast where you can see all our faces, which sometimes is very entertaining as well. Plus, you can put subtitles for the podcast. So some of the people we interview in Spanish and French. And of course, not everybody in the Caribbean speaks English either. So we make sure that people can see the videos with subtitles, and that's why we have YouTube. So yeah, just go to Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts. We're all over the place. Put in the Sargassum Podcast. And then we also have our website, which you can put into the description later on as well. So people can go straight there too.
Yes, and we will definitely make sure that people have an easy way to connect through the live stream. Now, I love that you have taken on this challenge of producing a podcast out of nothing, right? Like no previous training in communications or media. I mean, true scientist over here. And yet you were brave enough to see that perhaps a podcast is a really great form, a really great use of media for getting the information out there to all kinds of audiences and making it super accessible, like you're saying, in multiple languages for people throughout the world. What has been some of the challenges in starting a podcast?
Ooh, some of the challenges. Getting a team together was rather easy. I just sent out an email and I got some people together. I think most of the challenges were just like, okay, figuring out how do you make a podcast? Like, what type of like software are you going to use to cut the things? What are you going to use to make the little graphics for? And I am somebody who does like to make graphics, so I already was a bit familiar with Canva, so I was like, okay, we're going to use Canva for the social media. And yes, so it was a lot of like figuring out how to do video cutting, and that was something I was always straining away from, because making videos takes so much time, and to make them really good, you have to have quite some experience. And then I'm just really bad with choosing music for videos, which you normally have to do. So luckily for our podcast, we have the intro music, but otherwise we are not doing like a podcast that has music effects or other audio effects. So that at least I don't have to do. But it's just all of the things, like then once we launched, or even before launching, you have to work on producing the podcast, which is already a lot of work. At the same time, you have to find sponsors and grants to actually help you pay for that time. So that's really important. And then the third thing you have to do all at the same time is to advertise the podcast. So be really active on social media, go on shows like yours. And it all takes a lot of time, and you always are like, oh, where do I have to work on now? Make sure that I equally balance these things out, because if I don't advertise, it's not, the sponsors won't come because we won't have many listeners. If I don't have sponsors, I don't get paid. But I also have to make the podcast, because without the podcast, I can't advertise or get sponsors. So yes.
Yeah, it definitely can turn into a giant web of a to-do list. And it's like you're saying, constantly having to juggle these multiple roles that you have to take on, that you first have to learn, then you get to take on. And then there's a point of balance where it's at some point, you start getting into a rhythm of shooting the show, doing the editing, putting out the replay, advertising for the next, making sure you have that next person all lined up and ready to go. So yeah, there's definitely a juggling act with it. And interns are a great thing. And luckily, you all are looking for interns. Is that right?
Yes, and Friday is the last day to sign up. And we've gotten some cool funding from the Latin American Caribbean Center from Florida International University. And the funding is specifically for community college students from the US. So they want to make sure that through the funding they're giving us for the podcast, that up to 3 community college students can participate in a summer internship with us. It's going to be fully remote. So we are a team of 5 at our podcast. Robbie is in South Carolina. I'm in Mexico. Amar is in Germany. Cleo is in France. And Florence hops between France and Martinique. And we have never met each other in person. But we are a great team. So these interns are going to be part of this really weird remote working team, which is also a great experience to have nowadays, because remote work is going to be part of the future. And it is different from working in a team where you can see people face to face at the office. It takes a lot of good communication skills between people. And yes, it can be straining at some times, but it's also super fun, and you don't have to leave your house to do the work, and very flexible. So it's a great opportunity for students to experience that.
And it's a really unique opportunity, because I think something that's, we were missing out on when we were in graduate school or even undergrad was the science communication training. I mean, there were no such things as media and science classes. Those were always two fields that always, seem to stay separate. And so the more that there is a need for us to use our voice and use the new media to do that, whether it's podcasts or these live stream shows like this, the more that people will connect with the work that we're doing, they'll better understand what's going on with the ocean, what's going on in our environments, and they'll also become better activists as a result. And so exactly, the work that you're doing is super important, and this is such a neat opportunity for anyone who's a community college student. So we'll make sure we put the information up about that as well for you here on the live stream chat. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. One of the things I did want to find out from you, though, is you've already kind of alluded to it, but share with us, you're doing such important work. You've truly found your niche in seaweed, and in particular sargassum, and the fact that you're also getting a chance to use your creativity while speaking about science and producing this podcast. At the end of the day, what matters to you?
What matters to me really is to be sure that I can tell myself and people in the future, when the conversation comes up about this really important decade we're in right now, that I made a difference, that I turned my life around, I put stuff first that makes a difference, and stop doing things that are neutral and don't make a difference. Because it's not just about stopping things that are bad, but also taking away stuff that is neutral and doesn't make a difference, and use that time instead for something that makes a difference. And yes, I'm trying to make sure I'm not going to burn myself out, and take time for myself, and remember that there's other people working on this as well, and I can sometimes let go and have other people hold on to this big task. But yes, definitely my mission is to be one of the people who made a difference, and we need everybody to be on that boat. Like, we are not yet strong enough as a group to say we got this. Like, this climate change thing can still go bad, and so please get on board. Anybody listening, like, the best thing to do is check out what kind of environmental or climate activist groups you got in your region, and go to one of their meetings and see what they're about, and join them and work with them. It's a lot of fun as well.
That is such great advice. And it's true, you don't have to be a Dr. Elmer to make a difference, but thankfully she is making a difference in the way that she is. But it's true, we truly are, as they say, each drop creates an ocean. And that's why I love referring to you, referring to our audience as wave makers, because we all have the potential. You just have to have the will. And it sounds like you are definitely doing a great job too at making sure that you're working with intention to create something meaningful, to create a meaningful impact. And that's also really important for people to remember, is that all we have is time. And sometimes you just need to take a moment to really reevaluate, where are you putting your time, and is it making a difference? And, it also goes back to the quality of life piece. We only have so much time. And so live your best life, find fulfillment, make a big difference, like what Dr. Elmer is doing. I love it.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you so much, Fran, for joining us today. We'll keep an eye here in the discussion to see if people have any questions. And so Fran will be available to answer your questions here throughout the replays. Please, please, please be sure to share this episode. This is episode 35 of Conversations with Paola. We talk about really important topics, about really big picture things. And I think you can see that through this conversation, when you keep things simple and you don't overcomplicate it, you can actually really get a lot of stuff done, and you can really do so in the way that is best for how you can use your voice. And so in Fran's case, we've got Sargassum podcast. I mean, you study sargassum, why not talk about it on a podcast? It makes perfect sense. And it was a simple solution to get the word out. So thank you so much for all that you do. And we will make sure we hook up to some of your resources. One final thing I want to remind everybody, I mentioned it before, Fran is in our media mastermind group, and we have had so much fun this particular cohort because it turns out it's all women from all around the Caribbean who have joined us. They're all working in the field of marine science and who are doing their own parts to make a difference. So if this is a kind of group that you're interested in learning more about and joining, send us an email at hello@olapicreative.com, and I'd love to talk to you more about what the Media Mastermind is all about and how we can grow together and create more wonderful wave makers who are using their voice in the world to create change for good. So with that, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Fran, for joining us again, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for inviting me.